welcome back. It's some sort of the Clear Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, back with another offensive coordinator candidate preview. This time talking about Darrell Bevell, whose name was floated around. I think it was the first name floated around once Michael LaFleur was fired. And I got to say, a lot of fans, not a fan of Darrell Bevell. And I don't know if that's just because he threw the ball on the 1 yard line or just because he's been in the NFL forever and has had some mid offenses. But I don't think his resume is as respected as maybe it should be. So we're going to hop into that. As always with these, we bring on somebody who knows a hell of a lot more about these candidates than we do. And that brings us to Morgan Cannon at mcannon313 on Twitter. He's a contributor for Pride of Detroit. We decided let's go with the Lions guy to paint a full picture of Bevell. Could speak to his past tenure in Seattle, whatnot. But I think the Detroit tenure is maybe the most interesting one when examining his potential as the Jets offensive coordinator. So with that said, Morgan, how you doing, man?
Doing really well, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Do you agree with me? Do you think Darrell Bevell gets a bad rap from other fans? I will say I've peeked on Lions Reddit. I always like to look at what do fans think of their offensive coordinators, their former players. Like that's like my first thing, and then I go and do my own research. And gotta say, Lions fans didn't seem to really hate Darrell Bevell. I mean, they had other things going on with Matt Patricia, but it seemed like he's a good guy. His offense was all right. I don't know. I don't know if I get the hate. Do you think he gets a bad rap?
I definitely do, just because, well, his time in Detroit was obviously it was accompanied with the Boston boys, so that was during Matt Patricia was the head coach and Bob Quinn was the general manager, both Patriots products, if you will. And I had no issues with Bev. Stafford seemed to really get along with him and like get in sync with him. He's playing some really, really good ball, particularly if y'all want to go back and watch some of those games from the 2019 season, particularly the beginning. That was probably the precipice of the Patricia era, if you will. Like everything after that was downhill. So if you want to go back, I think the Lions were like 2-0-1, and the Lions hosted the Chiefs. And the line went head-to-head with Mahomes, man. They lost on kind of a controversial fumble call on Kerryon Johnson at the time. They got returned to the crib. And but Bevell had Stafford humming along, man. He was making some crazy throws. If you remember that highlight, it was like one of the throws of the year, but it went through like 3 or 4 different Chiefs defenders, like to Kenny Golladay in the back of the end zone. So that was all under Bev. And the offense performing the way it was kind of kept that ship afloat, because Patricia's defense was always bad and he wasn't loved by the players. So yeah, we can get into all that for sure with him becoming a head coach. But yeah.
How about you speak to that a little bit? I mean, because that's, I think, such a big part of being an offensive coordinator is having good camaraderie with your players and stuff like that. And with Michael LaFleur with the Jets, I mean, we don't have a ton of details on how that connection was, him and Zach Wilson, but it did seem to be a mixed bag, because there were times where you would get subtle comments in press conferences from the players, saying they knew our routes, the other team was onto our play calls, stuff like that. So it did seem to be a mixed bag in terms of that department with Mike LaFleur, at least from an outsider's perspective. So how do you think Darrell Bevell did in that department during his time in Detroit?
I think he did really well, man, because the Lions at that time had a very niche offense. Okay. So their offensive line now is a juggernaut. It features 2 of the best tackles in football, and Decker and Sewell, and then probably the best center in football, maybe the second best if you want to split hairs, and Frank Ragnow. At that time, Ragnow was around, but he was still young. The offensive line was not the way it is now. Even the weapons, right? Like now the Lions sport a receiving core with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams and DJ Chark. We'll see if he comes back, and Josh Reynolds and all these guys. But at the time, Bevell was working with Stafford, a pretty shoddy run game, as it always was, until this regime came in and decided they're going to not do that anymore. But so not much of a run game. And then the receivers were Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones Jr., who's now in Jacksonville. And then Kenny's obviously near you guys over there at the Giants, getting paid to do not much. But at the time, neither of those guys really generated much separation at all. Like to put that in perspective, Jared Goff would not do well in that offense, because the windows were tight. There wasn't a lot of separation. You kind of had to be pick and choose where you're going to take shots. But he really, I feel like, got on the same page with Stafford, and they threw a ton of 50-50 balls, man. Like balls where Galladay and Jones were not very open, but they made it work because Bevell was like, okay, this is what we're working with here. We kind of got like a basketball team at receiving, at the receiver position. So I liked Bevell because, again, he kept the Lions, especially 2019, right before that. They started that season pretty well, if you remember. And then after they lost to the Chiefs in that shootout game, the next week they went to Green Bay, and it was Sunday Night Football. And if you remember, that was the hands to the face game where they called the two phantom hands to the face
Vaguely,
on
yes.
Trey Flowers, and it was a debacle. Like, we've had a lot of issues with refs here in Detroit, but that was a bad one. That was probably the last time I screamed in my house. Like, I'm not really, a yeller, but that happened. And then when Stafford got hurt shortly thereafter, and everything went to hell. And then even in 2020, the offense was pretty okay, was doing well despite not a whole ton of weapons. And then that just when the Patricia era really hit the skids, and got fired after Thanksgiving. And then that was when Bevell took over as head coach. So
how did you feel he did in that interim head coaching role? I know that's a tough spot, but he has experience with that 2 seasons in a row in Detroit and Jacksonville. And not that hopefully he does not have to do that in New York if he does become the offensive coordinator. But, I think that does kind of speak to maybe a coach's capabilities in terms of leadership and running an entire team. I mean, how do you feel like he did in that tough spot?
See, I think he did spectacularly in that spot because at the time, like, I think a lot of people know, like, Patricia was pretty toxic, like, outside of Detroit, right? But
yeah,
it was really bad, man, from like a in the building standpoint, players, like everything. It was not good. So when he took over, I feel like there was probably like the air let back into the room, and he was like, look, and he won a game. The first game, I believe, that he was the interim head coach, the Lions went and beat Chicago on the road. I'm like 97% sure, because that was pretty sweet. They lost the rest of the games, but I believe the record wasn't really, or the schedule wasn't really favorable to them. And that was a bad roster that eventually got torn apart by this current regime. So yeah, I thought he did really well when you consider what he was working with. That poor guy, man. And then the following season, I didn't think it could get worse taking over for Patricia, but it got worse.
Yeah, we'll hop into the Jacksonville tenure towards the end of this pod, because there's definitely does seem like we'll hop into some potential criticisms of Bevell, but it is hard to evaluate a guy whose 2 head coaches have been Matt Patricia and Urban Meyer the last 2 times he's been an offensive coordinator. I mean, that's an uphill battle. When he arrived,
like 2 of the worst situations in the last probably like decade or so.
I mean, Gase would be the only other guy that's up. Gase in New York is the only other guy you could throw in there.
Was he super toxic? Like, I know he had some issues, but
I mean, honestly, compared to Urban and Patricia, no, but yes, Gase was toxic. I mean,
he's from around here too. He's from Ypsilanti. So
you're partial to Adam Gase?
I liked Gase back in the day. I won't lie. Like, during one of those coaching cycles, I was like, that'd be pretty cool. So
he did have a good resume before he became head coach. Man, I mean, he led that Broncos offense. I know it was Peyton Manning, but they were putting up like almost 40 points a game. So
it was like the Christmas past Peyton Manning, wasn't it? It wasn't really Peyton Manning.
No, it was post neck surgery. Yeah, I mean, once you saw that opening press conference with Gase, though, and his eyes were all over the place, you just knew it wasn't going to go well. You just were pretty certain. All right, well, so when Bevell gets to Detroit, Patricia had a year with another guy who actually ended up coaching under Gase, Jim Bob Cooter. I believe he was the offensive coordinator in 2018. In terms of him installing the offense and the differences from 2018 to 2019 for the Lions, I mean, what was that transition like? I mean, obviously, 2018 was a tough year. The only Lions memory I have from that season is the Jets going in there on week 1 and dropping like a 50 burger with Sam Darnold.
Patricia's first game, man. That's how that should have been a bad omen. I thought, again, I'm partial to Bevell. Like, I don't think he's like the best offensive mind in football, but you guys have a ready-made roster. So like, if you can even get to that offense to like being competent, like 15th DVOA, like middle of the road, I feel like the Jets could easily make noise in the AFC. So I think Bevell would be a good fit because, again, so Cooter, let's go to Jim Bob Cooter in 2018. Matthew Stafford is a lot of things, but he's not a guy you really want to dink and dunk a ton with, right? Because he's inevitably going to make a mistake. Like, he's not one of these guys that stays super clean for long periods of time. So Jim Bob Cooter took away, like, arguably Stafford's best asset in his, like, deep ball and, cutting them loose, like throwing like those intermediate like passes outside the hash, that takes some arm strength. He kind of he clipped Stafford's wings, if you will, and it was ugly because the Lions were turning the ball over a ton. We were seeing some ugly offense. And then Bevell came in 2019, and Stafford was really complimentary of him right away, because it seemed like Bevell was like, all right, man, you've been doing this a while. Like, what do you want to do? And like, let's build this thing around what you want to do. What you're good at, which is what the Lions' current offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, is getting head coaching interviews right now for, because he's like, all right, we know what Jared Goff does well, and we know what he doesn't do well. Let's do what he does well, So I give Bevell his roses, because he saw what Stafford was and wasn't, and started cooking up an offense based on that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and obviously Bevell had a long tenure in Seattle where he had some success with Russell Wilson, a different kind of quarterback to Stafford. So
very different, for sure. That's a good point.
Yeah, when Bevell came in and you guys were looking at what he did in Seattle, trying to picture how he would bring that to Detroit, how do you think what you ended up getting out of Bevell, the way that offense looked, compared to what he did in Seattle? Did he carry some of that over, or did he really mold that to Stafford and some of the Lions' strengths at the time?
Maybe some of the running concepts, he tried to bring over from Seattle, but again, the Lions are just historically bad at running the football for so long. I thought it was just like, I was like, it's just never going to happen. I don't know. I'm 32. It hadn't happened since the 90s, for me. So, and now obviously they run the ball pretty well. But
he test to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They did that to a lot of people, although it wasn't great towards the end of the season. And I don't know, it just was up and down, but he tried implementing some of the same running concepts. Obviously that didn't work so well, but passing wise, it seemed like he completely tailored everything to the way Stafford plays, because we've seen now Russell Wilson is a very specific kind of quarterback too, and he was in Seattle. So, yeah.
And how would you describe Bevell's run scheme? Because, Jets are kind of an outside running team, more wide zone, stuff like that. So will we see Bevell kind of take after that, or is he more of an inside power running kind of guy? What did that run game look like with him?
From what I remember, it was a lot of zone heavy stuff. He didn't really run a lot of gap power. Like, because they didn't, at the time too, the Lions didn't really have the personnel for that, for like a gap running scheme, like getting, pin and pull, all that good stuff, counter. And he tried a lot of the zone stuff. And that regime too tried to allocate resources towards that, trying to run the ball. It just never really worked. But I would assume, especially because y'all's running game was pretty good, was it not? The Jets
at the start of the year, with Brees and AVT, and then once they went down, they went down the shitter. But
Elijah Vera Tucker,
and hopefully they get Becton back.
It
seems like they'll make some O-line changes. But I think Saleh does want the identity of the offense to be based on the ground, and I think that will be a big thing they look at with these OC candidates in terms of his passing concepts. Because now, obviously, I think the thing that I am interested with Bevell is, now he's, for 1 year at least, the QB coach and passing game coordinator for Miami with Mike McDaniel, who was, run game coordinator in San Francisco. So I think some of the passing success you've seen in Miami, some of it at least has to be attributed to Bevell. And I think you can also attribute maybe some of Tua's rehabilitation as a player could potentially be attributed to Bevell. So I'm excited to see, or curious to see, what he might look like as an OC after spending some time with McDaniel. But at least in Detroit, I mean, what were some of the go-tos and priorities in the passing game? I mean, when you turn on a Detroit Lions game in 2019 or 2020, I mean, what are they trying to do through the air?
He was really just trying to work his matchups, right? So, like, again, like Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, they just were not great at getting separation. Like, I bet if we watch the Jacksonville game tonight, like if there's a lot of Marvin Jones receptions, which there probably will be, Trevor Lawrence loves him some Marvin Jones. He's never really wide open, man. It's tight in there, but Trevor Lawrence has got a big league arm, so it's not a problem. But back in the day, you'd see him trying to work matchups, whether it was motioning Kenny Galladay or Marvin Jones and like getting them into a favorable matchup. And then they're running a lot of those skinny posts to just try to get, leverage where they can like catch a jump ball or a 50-50 ball. Back in the day, Kenny Galladay was really good at that. Those 2019 highlights. I feel like that'd probably be a good
Made him a very rich man.
It did, man. That one season, 2019, and all of his. If you type that, I feel like that would be a good thing for Jets fans to watch. Maybe like Kenny Galladay 2019 highlights, because if I'm thinking the way I'm looking at it, if I were a Jets fan, I know the quarterback situation's a little bit unsettled, but Bevell's been around football long enough where he's going to be like, yo, this Garrett Wilson dude is a baller. Like, I know how to make this work. You know what I'm saying? Because he made it work with Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones, who are neither Garrett Wilson. You know what I'm saying? So I think he could cook because he's done it. He's done it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that's something that intrigues me about Bevell in terms of, you talk about the Lions playing basketball with their receivers in Detroit, and then you look at what he was working with in Seattle. It was a little bit different. Do you think he? It sounds like he does a good job of molding his scheme to his players. But if Darrell Bevell were to come to New York, and you imagine the Jets are going to make some changes on the offensive side of the ball, what are some of the types of players you think he would try to bring in that would accentuate that type of offense? Do you think they really would benefit from going and getting a jump ball type of receiver, which they don't really have unless Denzel Mims is able to turn it around? They don't really have that. Look, Garrett Wilson's got a crazy vertical, not to take anything away from him, but he's also a great separator. He's great after the catch. He can do it all. They don't have that designated, jump ball, tight window type of guy, though, unless you're counting Corey Davis. So I guess, do you think this is one of those things where, look, he's just going to take what the Jets have and really try to mold the offense around it? But if not, what are some of the players you think he would try to bring in?
I think he could do I think adding an X would help, like an X receiver, like a typical big body guy would help with the Jets, just like with Garrett Wilson too. Like maybe that X might draw the one sometimes, and then Garrett Wilson's just cooking your second or nickel or whoever you get him matched up on. But like another thing I think of for Bevell, are you guys familiar with Jamal Agnew in Jacksonville?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Jamal Agnew got himself a payday in Jacksonville, and they still use him, right? So Doug Peterson's found a way to incorporate a lot of Jamal Agnew in that offense. But Jamal Agnew really started to eat in those 2019, 2020 years under Darrell Bevell. And Agnew is a very specific player. You're not going to line him up, outside the hash 60 times in a game and just ask him to win one-on-ones, because he's not tall. I believe he played at San Diego University, first of all. So like it was very small and, college experience, I'm sure. But initially the Lions just had him as a kick returner. And then Bevell started to incorporate him into as like a gadget weapon. And then pretty quickly he was seeing a lot of snaps on the offense. And yeah, so that's like my brain is kind of going to, he'll figure it out. Like I'm going to get Garrett Wilson 12 touches a game if I can, whether it's like a jet motion, like end around, or like a push, like a pop pass, or like, bubble screens, get him downfield. Yeah, that's something I definitely think he'll excel at.
Yeah, and that's actually a good transition to the next thing I wanted to ask. His creativity. How would you kind of judge his creativity as a play caller, and whether that's trick plays or just mixing and matching, being unpredictable? Obviously Agnew is a perfect example, the way they incorporated him in 2020 and 2019 with the Lions. How would you evaluate his creativity as a play caller?
Again, strong, because he'd come out with some trick plays, and then he'd figure out ways to get some of these like specific types of players like Jamal Agnew and Kenny Galladay. Like he made Kenny Galladay a featured receiver, and as y'all are seeing now, that's an impressive accomplishment. Because it is not working out right now. Like he does not need to be your one. If he's your two and your quarterback is willing to try and fit some stuff into some tight windows, then he can produce, because he does have, I call it like man hands. You know what I'm saying? Like winning at the point of attack. Like
right.
That's all his 2019 highlights are. Like there's a DB right there, but Galladay was just stronger and more aggressive, so he caught them all. He was just a 50-50 ball master. I think one critique I would have of Bevell is his sometimes insistence at like staying with the run. Like, cause man, like the Lions would be in a ton of like 3rd and long situations through those years, just because I get it. Like you can't not run the ball ever, but I don't know. You'd hear a lot of Lions fans like begging him to throw it on early downs just to try to stay out of some of these 3rd and longs that would get Stafford inevitably teed off on. But again, the Jets seem a little bit more like poised to be able to run the ball with Elijah Vera Tucker, and if Becton comes back, and you got Breece Hall, and so
yeah, that's certainly the hope. I think, going back to the first thing we talked about in terms of the hate that Bevell gets, I think a lot of it honestly stems from that Super Bowl play, from passing on the 1-yard line. And look, not to say there aren't. I know there was a contingent of Seahawks fans from like 2016 and 2017 that were kind of getting frustrated with, kind of what you're saying in terms of, I don't want to call it old school offense, but yeah, that some of the tenets of those old school offensive principles of, you gotta, and the Jets fell into this trap too last year, where it was like, you have to throw short or run on 2nd and long to make yourself set up in a 3rd and manageable situation, where it's like, all right, but could we try a 15-yard pass on 2nd down and just try to get the first down every once in a while? Things like that.
Yep.
But
Sure.
Situationally, whether it's clutch situations, red zone situations, 3rd and short, I mean, those gotta have it type of plays. How do you feel Bevell did in those situations, outside of the infamous 1-yard interception in the Super Bowl, and not just handing it to Marshawn Lynch, and the rest of his tenure, and specifically in Detroit? How do you feel like he did situationally?
A lot of those big time moments, I feel like Stafford would somehow they create something where they got somebody in a favorable matchup and were able to get the conversion, or he drew up something specific for Agnew, or they would do some trick plays back in the day under Bevell. I mean, they do still under Ben Johnson, but yeah, I think he has his, I feel like he always has his little bag. Like, I would, here's a conversion, I gotta have it here. I got a couple little tricks in the old bag to move the chains if I need to. Going back to the Seattle thing, I remember where I was when that play happened. Part of me is like, I wonder how much Pete Carroll was, you know what I'm saying, though, because they were trying to make Russell Wilson the dude at the time. And I always go back, like, I wonder how much of that was like Bevell being like, no, we should throw it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I think Bevell gets the criticism because he's the offensive coordinator, but
Right.
I bet you somebody has to have done a full expose on what exactly happened there. But yes, Pete Carroll deserves some responsibility.
For sure.
It is hard to overcome that look. I mean, that might be the biggest gaffe in Super Bowl history
Ever. Yeah.
And if he gets hired here, the New York sports radio guys will run with that and won't be able to let it go.
I'm sure. Our sports radio is really bad here, and I know it's probably way worse in New York because it's a way bigger market.
Oh yeah, and it's probably, of all the markets, sports markets in the country, probably has the most different number of shows. There's just so many voices always clashing, and most of it is just very fan-minded, so it can get messy, and that type of stuff will be criticized.
That was the point of the podcast, is to have like measured, look, sometimes it's a little bit sarcastic because sometimes Michael and I do get a little reactionary, but the point of the pod was to try to be as measured and rational and balanced and present both sides, where it's like, you listen to New York sports radio, and a lot of the times it's just like, go with the wind and try to get clicks and say the most absurd things possible to go viral.
We have that here, but probably just on a way micro scale, sports radio wise. Like, we only have one voice, and everyone knows that he's a dummy, and we don't listen to him. Keep it moving.
Yeah, but I mean, look, if you win games, everyone's going to be silenced, and if you are going to win games, you're going to need good quarterback play to do that. And like you said, plenty of times already, Matthew Stafford seemed like he had a good fit with Bevell. He was producing in those games when they were together. So looking at Stafford and how he fit with Bevell, and then comparing that to what the Jets might end up with, the Jets' top quarterback target right now for me and for a lot of people, and potentially the most likely one, is Derek Carr. So looking at those two guys, comparing them against each other, Stafford and Carr, could you picture Carr stepping into Stafford's shoes and having the same sort of success under Bevell that Stafford did?
I think so, man, because I put it this way, like if y'all had Carr this year, I think you'd be playing still.
Because that's what we've all been saying. We all believe that.
It stinks, like, because that defense is ready-made. Sauce is actually from I live on the east side of Detroit, so my brain just went back to there. But yeah, he's from King High School. So yeah, I love Sauce. I have a cat named Sauce.
We do. There are a lot of Detroit ties with the Jets between Sala and Sauce.
Yeah, man.
I don't know if there's anybody else in the draft.
Michael Floor was a Michigan guy, but he's gone
now. Well,
Bart Scott back in the day.
That's true. Bart Scott, yeah.
But
I'm sure there's others.
Going back to Carr being a fit with Bevell, I think so, man, because Carr's a pro, right? He may not be ever, he's not going to probably be an elite quarterback ever, barring some miraculous like step up this late in his career. But I mean, he's right in that realm with like the Goffs of the world. Like if everything's right, I feel like you can win with him because he's shown that he's a competent passer in this league. So yeah, I think Bevell, you guys already got weapons. The offensive line's already in good shape, add a few things here and there. And I think that would be a match, because I was going to ask you guys what you thought about your quarterback position. So the Jets are not going to ride into next year with Zach Wilson and some other veteran again, right?
Certainly not as a starter. I mean, it's possible they could go with like Jimmy G and bring back Mike White and then just try to have like a quarterback competition. Like there is maybe a route for him to earn it in training camp, but I think more than likely they're going to go after a guy like Carr or hell, maybe Lamar Jackson or somebody like that. I just don't see them riding into the season with Zach. Now this is a question that we've had for some of the other OC candidates, talking about like, okay, well, so what are some of the other offenses around the league that relate to this potential OC? The Jets fans can go and watch and maybe a distant relative. It seems like a lot of offensive schemes are somewhat related. And so you can watch that and see the success or the failures they've had and kind of get a picture. Bevell's a little different because he's been an offensive coordinator for 15 years. You could literally watch, every single season of him being an OC outside of 2018 and this past one. But is there another offense in the league, with that said, that you can maybe point to and say that's pretty similar to what Bevell would try to do?
I mean, I feel like Seattle, especially, obviously that's the easy one because I'm sure Carroll's still adhering to a lot of those principles. But any of these, Jacksonville too, I feel like Jacksonville would be a good comparable one, because if you bring in Carr, you don't, it's not Trevor Lawrence, obviously he's not a runner and everything like that, but they'd move. I think that offense would click, because all it really needed this year was competence. And you guys would have beat the Lions. Like the Lions really didn't play a good game in New York. Well, they beat the Giants pretty handedly, but the Jets, that was not the best game, but that was honestly just it got decided because Goff was way more competent than.
And that was one of Zach's better games, honestly. I mean, he missed so many throws. I know that one to Elijah Moore. That was crazy, but he missed so many throws over the middle that like so many of those gimme throws that just move the sticks and keep him out of those third and longs. And it's like, yeah, you're right. It is the difference between winning and losing for a number of Jets games this year. So I do think that's why they're going to go with the veteran. And that is also kind of why a guy like Bevell, to me, I don't think fans should necessarily scoff at him, because I think he's an average offensive coordinator. Would you agree with me? I feel like if you had to rank him in terms of like what you're going to get, okay, sure. You having Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, that Chiefs level offense, probably not. No, although as you said, he did have the shootout with them a few years ago. But can Bevell bring you, especially with the talent that the Jets have on the offense side of the ball, an average NFL offense? Which I know Jets fans roll their eyes at, but they literally haven't had an average NFL offense since 2015. So do you feel like, do you feel like that is, if the Jets bring in Bevell, I mean, that's kind of the type of offensive performance they're going to get? A guy middle of the pack, is going to do some things well. Maybe he's not the flashiest, or seeing what Ben Johnson's doing with the Lions, maybe he's not that level, but certainly can raise the floor of what this Jets offense has been.
Definitely, man. Because I think that's, if I had to guess, like if I try to step in the mind of Saleh, that's what I would think is going to happen, because Salah's like, all right, I got this defense. I got some dudes on rookie contracts on this defense. Like, we could add a couple pieces and then really be cooking, you know. I don't really like, I wouldn't be gambling, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I were gonna put it in like a restaurant analogy, like if I'm really this hungry, like I need a good meal to really get me right. I'm not gonna roll the dice on something that's unknown. I'm gonna go to one of my staple, you know, always gonna hit above average at least, you know, meals. And I feel like that's what Bevell's gonna be. You know what you're gonna get with Bevell, especially if you pair him with a vet like Carr or Garoppolo or anybody with like some semblance of QB competency, and your offense is going to be good. Not good. I don't think you're going to light the world on fire, but he's going to figure out how to get Garrett Wilson going. The run game his run game, if I'm not mistaken, outside of his tenure in Detroit, his teams were always pretty decent at running the football, particularly those teams in Seattle back in the day. Right. So
yeah. And Adrian Peterson back in Minnesota, his first stop as OC.
Yeah.
I know
Adrian Peterson cooking in Detroit even.
That's
you guys
true.
remember.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
He brought Adrian Peterson's career back to life for a little bit there during those.
That's like Ed Reed on the Jets. I mean, that's just one of those that you
Frank
forget
Gore.
even happened.
You missed the Frank Gore comparison.
Or Frank Gore on the Jets. Yeah, I guess that's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but looking back to the Detroit tenure, and you talked a little bit about some of the good and bad that offense brought to the table those couple of years with Bevell. Turning that over to the defensive side of the ball and how they would plan for this Lions offense, what types of opposing defenses do you think Bevell's Lions had the most success against? And then what kinds of defenses do you think caused the most trouble for them?
Teams that would really heat up Stafford. So like any of the defenses that would just be like, we trust, like if they had pretty good cover corners and could like put their ears back and like send 6 or 7 after Stafford, and that line just didn't really protect him that well. And then they were behind the sticks, I feel like, all the time. Like rarely were the Lions ever throwing the ball from like advantageous down and distances. So any team that would really heat him up, I feel like those offenses were having tough time against. But if they sat back and like allowed Stafford to figure it out, then I feel like Bevell usually could get things going pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like Bevell in like my, you know, it's only been a week since they fired LaFleur, and so I've watched a little bit of Bevell, and kind of my initial takeaway, and you let me know what you think of this, is he's kind of the type of offense coordinator that is going to get you the output to the level of your personnel. Meaning, like, if you have a good team like he had in Seattle and he has the type of personnel, I think that's an offense that thrived. I mean, look, he had multiple top 5 and top 10 offenses in Seattle. But if you go and give him a team that doesn't have the good offensive line, has middling quarterback play or receiver, you know, it's like, is he the type of guy who can overcome a very weak roster? I don't know. Maybe he could get them to like top 20 type of offense. But if he's a guy that, you know, let's say Becton is healthy and they do get AVT back and they're able to redo this offensive line and Brees and Garrett, like, you know, this offense really comes together from a talent perspective, and they go and get a guy like Derek Carr. I do feel like Bevell is the type of offense coordinator that could have this Jets offense humming, and you feel good about him. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment of him, that he's kind of like the type of OC that will just get you to the level of talent that you have, but maybe not anything more than that?
Yeah, I mean, the Lions were playing backup quarterbacks towards the end of 2019 when Stafford went down and things went to hell. And he, you know, he'd try his best, man, because they were playing. I'm David Blau.
Yeah,
it was tough, man. There was
Thanksgiving.
But then even remember that Thanksgiving game, my brain is sick and it remembers things like this. And he came out on the first drive and they took a shot and I believe it was Galladay, and he got caught because he's slow. But it was a big gain, and I was like, okay, Bevell. He's saying, I don't care today. We're not doing this, because it was ugly for a little bit there. But I feel like it's difficult, especially in the NFL, where everything is so close in terms of talent level and parity. Like, if you don't have at least okay quarterback play, life is going to be tough.
Yeah.
Because defenses can be like, all right, we're just going to put 7 in the box. We don't we're not scared of you throwing the ball. Life is going to be hard.
Yeah, we saw that.
We saw that against the Lions.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
exactly what that game was.
They were probably the most disrespectful, I think, out of any team the Jets faced.
Absolutely.
Which also burned Aaron Glenn several times, man, because only the few times you guys moved the ball was when he sent like 7 after Wilson, and Wilson just threw YOLO balls. So he's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, that's true. That is probably why Wilson ended up having one of his better games. All right,
Garrett
so
Wilson bailed him out.
oh yeah, and he had Jeff Smith before the half. He had the pro day throw to Uzama. He did have some nice balls in that one. To summarize, I guess strengths and weaknesses with Darrell Bevell. I mean, how would you characterize overall what he does well, and then what Jets fans might not like if he becomes the OC?
So hopefully, because I know he had a year off in between Seattle and Detroit. Okay, so if you go back, I looked up this stuff just before I got on so I could talk about it accurately with you guys. And he had a year off, and I feel he talked a lot at length. Even like he did a lot of self scouting. And honestly, with the way the Lions offense was equipped during the Patricia era, I thought he did pretty well. Like he had Stafford playing well enough to where Sean McVay was like, you know what, I'm going to trade for Matthew Stafford. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to move heaven and earth and sacrifice my team's future. And but my only like real qualm with him during that era was just predictability on like early downs. Like if God forbid, like hopefully y'all can run the ball next year, the Jets can, but if you guys can't, right, if the run game just isn't getting going, I would hope that he wouldn't do what he did in Detroit, where he's like, wow, I still got to try, because then you're just putting Carr or whoever 3rd and 8 plus, multiple times a game, 6, 7, 8 times a game. That's a recipe for disaster. You know what I'm saying? It's just tough to convert those.
Yeah. And that seems like something that maybe with Michael Floor, do you agree, Ben? Maybe like first down, a little predictability with the run game could be an issue because the Jets were supposed to be a ground and pound team early in the season. They were a very good running team, but it was quickly apparent after those big injuries that they were no longer a running team. But it seemed like the philosophy shift never happened to kind of match those injuries. So that's something we would definitely like to see. And like you said, I think the year of self-reflection is a big thing for coaches in the league. It's something that I think Adam Gase could have definitely used because, he had a tough tenure in Miami. Then the Jets go and hire him a couple of weeks after he gets fired. I don't think that was going to be enough for him to really process that tenure and get get the, self-reflection that he needed to learn from that. Maybe he could have panned out better if he did get that year. So seems like he did benefit from that, but we'll see if, a couple of years have passed since then, if he can maybe build on that as well and see, depending on how the Jets run game goes. But one of the years that he has had since those 2 in Detroit was that 2021 season with the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's the biggest thing that concerns Jets fans that I see them talking about when Bevell gets brought up. They say, why would you hire the guy who led that Jaguars offense last year? You have some thoughts on that Jacksonville season with Bevell?
Guys, I'm not even okay. I'm going to preface this with I'm not even a Michigan guy. Okay. So I didn't go to the University of Michigan, not a Michigan guy, but my goodness, I don't think you can take anything away from what happened in Jacksonville in 2021. Like DJ Chark came to Detroit, and this man was talking like coming to Detroit was like reaching oh my God, this is like so night and day to what I was dealing with in Jacksonville.
Right.
I'm sure people read that Athletic article. Like Marvin Jones is will always be one of my favorite players, just from like a human standpoint, just like a great dude. His family is great around here. Marvin Jones, there's a story in that Athletic article where Marvin Jones had to be like held back from going to fight Urban Meyer. And again, I didn't think Marvin Jones would go fight anybody. I was like, that's really crazy because he's just such a nice human. I mean, he's a baller, but yeah, I was like, wow, he really pissed off Marvin Jones that bad. So I think what I told you guys pre-show, it's tough to go Bevell took over for the Patricia era, which was really toxic. And I was like, man, no way it can get worse than that. And then it did the next year. It got worse. Urban, that was wild. Like I never would have thought it would have gone that bad, but it did with Meyer. And I'm not a Michigan snobby, so again, I'm like, I don't hate them for no reason, but holy cow.
No, I think that's the thing for me. Like when I talk about Bevell, when I think about him, is like, yeah, it was bad, but I mean, do we really think anyone in his shoes there would have been successful? I mean, Urban Meyer was just an absolute disaster in every single way, and you could just look at the Jaguars now, and just by getting him out of there, how much more competent it is. So I don't hold Bevell to that too much, and just the talent as well. Rookie quarterback. So I don't really hold that against him. So bringing it all together, picturing him as the Jets offensive coordinator, if Darrell Bevell were hired by the Jets, and this is also considering who some of the other candidates are. Greg Olsen is out there, former Raiders OC, Brian Johnson, Eagles quarterback coach. But other than Greg Olsen, it's a lot of inexperienced guys such as Johnson. The Patriots tight ends coach is in there. Marcus Brady, the Colts OC, was fired. So comparing Darrell Bevell amongst some of these hires, if he is the guy who the Jets chose, would you say to Jets fans that it's a good hire?
I mean, I think so, just for the reasons we outlined, right? Like, if the Jets were a completely rebuilding team, like if you guys were the Bears, right? Like the Bears are going to stink next year still. Like their fans are like, we got all this capital and money. I'm like, listen, brothers, like it's going to be tough for a little bit here. Let me tell you. But if you guys were a completely rebuilding team, super young roster, I'd say, take a swing on a young offensive coordinator, let him grow with the Derek Carr, or with the young quarterback later on or whatever. But because the defense is kind of championship caliber, like right now, and you got, pieces in place on offense, I would go with the more. If I'm Saleh, I'm thinking, all right, I could go young with the offensive coordinator and try to get something spicy and flashy and or whatever, you want to call it. But I think I might go with the tried and true horse who I know what I'm going to get. Like, especially if you guys are planning on going to get like a Derek Carr or a Jimmy G, I feel like that'd be a good pairing. Both them dudes have done it for a long time, whoever you go with quarterback wise. And if Bevell's seen some stuff now, man, all them years in Seattle, dealt with the Matty P years in Detroit. Yuck. Then he went to Urban Meyer. Holy cow. So again, I think Jets fans, I hear y'all. I get the trepidation, but I would just delete the Jacksonville. Delete it, man. You can't count that to anything.
Yeah, and you never know how that could have affected him in a positive way. I mean, learning from that nightmare of a situation. I mean, maybe it toughens him up and
exactly.
Well, I mean, and maybe it allows him to handle New York a little bit better. And as I said earlier, I would be curious to see what a year under Mike McDaniel and rehabilitating Tua has done for his career.
Definitely.
With that said, though, like you said, I mean, I think there are sexier and more exciting offensive coordinator candidates they could hire. But if they hire him, this isn't like, when the Jets hired Gase 2 years ago, the pit in my stomach I had where I was like, oh, they made a mistake. And we all knew it immediately. It wouldn't be like that. I would be like, all right, look, they can have top 15, 16th ranked offense. I mean, I think that's the type of offense performance you're going to get, which maybe isn't the most exciting thing. Perhaps it's better. Perhaps you're getting a great season out of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall and Derek. But like at the very least, I think the Jets would put together an NFL competent offense. And while I would have said it would be questionable if he'd be an upgrade over Mike LaFleur. Maybe I would still say that. The thing to remember is this Jets offense didn't have a single touchdown the last 3 weeks of the season. And I don't know if I see that happening with Darrell Bevell.
Exactly.
Maybe if he's straddled with Zach Wilson, maybe, but I feel like Bevell that experience would have helped in times like that to get the Jets at least a few field goals, at least maybe one touchdown in those situations. And then if he has the personnel to match, I feel like he is the type of OC that can squeeze the most out of it. It's just, do you go for the big swing and worry about striking out, or do you just try to get on base here with this hire? And I think that's kind of what the Jets have to weigh. And who knows? Maybe he's grown and improved after the last few seasons. But Morgan, I really appreciate you.
If y'all were competent on offense right now, you still playing. You guys are talking about a wild card weekend, so that's the way I look at it. I'm sure Saleh's looking at it that way too. I just need to get
Michael, what's the stat again where it's like they lost 5 games where they only allowed a touchdown or something crazy like that? I forget the exact.
Something like that. I know they allowed the fewest points per game in losses this year. So
that's the Lions offense and the Jets defense this year.
Oh, without easily, yeah.
These two teams were just like polar opposites. Like Lions defense, Lions have the Jets defense. They are on a bye right now, and they're getting ready for the Super Bowl. If the Jets had the Lions offense, we'd be on a bye right now.
They started slow and finished well, and we started great and just collapsed. And it's two teams very I know they are kind of they hired each other. Campbell and Saleh hired at the same time, and it kind of feels like the two teams are on a similar trajectory in terms of we're basement dwellers and then are trying to work their way up, and both of them just narrowly missed the playoffs this year. And I like the Lions. I know we said it beforehand. I kind of feel like the Lions and
NFC brothers.
Right. I would have maybe thrown in the Browns in this group, but they are AFC, and now they've have had a few seasons and they've traded for some guys and have some talent. Yeah. So I'm not going to include the Browns in this, but I feel like the Lions are I don't know, kind of like I don't hate them. You know what I mean? Like if the Lions are in the playoffs, I'm definitely cheering for the Lions. I feel for any fan base that has had to deal with anything remotely similar to what we've had to deal with. So with that said, Morgan, I hope you guys have a great offseason. I hope the Lions are primed for a great year. I'm very interested to see what they do at quarterback and some of the moves they make. But thank you so much for coming on, man. We really appreciate it. Let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can follow you. Always looking for smart NFL accounts to follow. And as we said, it kind of feels like the Lions and Jets are on a similar path. So I'll always be interested to keep up with what's happening with them.
Yeah, appreciate y'all, man. Definitely let me know if you ever need me on again.
If they
I'm
play.
a big fan of the Jets. Love Saleh. Love Sauce, obviously, both native Metro Detroiters. Sauce from the east side and then Saleh's from Dearborn. So, yeah, big fans. You guys can find my stuff at prideofdetroit.com. And then Twitter handle is just mcannon313. So, but yeah, appreciate y'all having me on, man.
Well, thank you for coming on. Let us know. Darrell Bevell, offensive coordinator. Let us know. Tweet us at CYJPod on Twitter. Comment, YouTube comments below at Jets X Factors YouTube page. I have a feeling a lot of people are anti-Bevell. We'll see if this podcast has shed some light into some of his positives, or if people are digging their heels in that they don't want to go for this type of a hire. Let us know. Very interested. Let's start the discussion. So with that said, thank you for listening, everybody. Have a great week. Go Jets.